think Jamie's getting tired of seeing my room here. She and I have so many Zoom calls together. So at any rate, thank you all for joining. I know we're have a couple minutes while people are coming in, and I just want to say I know that we are in just really deeply troubling times right now and transitional times in the country. So I appreciate our panelists for being here, and I appreciate our attendees for being here too. I know you all will have bios as part of the panel information packet for the sign up. So we have bios there. And in this case, obviously our panelists' bios are really an important part of our call. So one of the things I want to do is just, as we start off here, is talk a little bit about what you're doing now. Before we even talk about how you got to where you are, why don't we talk about what you're actually doing? So Glynn, I'll start with you. You're the creator and host of Snap Judgment, which is broadcast on over 400 stations nationwide and downloaded some 2 million times a month. So that's incredible. And you're also the host of a spin-off show, Spook. So again, before we talk about how you got to where you are, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do? Like, what does your average day or week look like?
Thank you, Shauna, for having me, and hello to everybody out there in Zoom land. Yeah, I will say this, as it's very difficult to say like what a typical day is, but right now we're working really, really hard to find stories that match the moment and the zeitgeist that we're in right now, and it's been a crazy time. Generally, to make a Snap Judgment episode from start to finish, and that means from pitch, this is a story I'd like to do, the interviews, the edits, the scoring, the re-edits, the other interviews, and to put that into an actual episode from start to finish takes about 4 to 5 months, which means that it's difficult for us sometimes to spin on a dime to make something happen immediately. But that's what the staff has been doing recently. It's like putting together, instead of 4 to 5 months, let's make it in 4 to 5 days and see if we can find stories that really work. It's been amazing to see people do that, to see the team come together and just say, this is our time. We're gonna make some new rules and make that work as well. And I think that this will probably come out in the course of our talk, but this flexibility and being able to move in real time has been really, really important to, I think, the success of Snap.
Okay. So did you have a typical day or week before pandemic? Or has it always been kind of taking things as they come and trying to react quickly?
Well, the whole idea is we're now expanding from Snap Judgment. Sure, there's a typical week is like, we're gonna have a pitch session. I want to hear different stories. I want to edit those things down. I'm gonna spend some time writing my own. More often than not, I have to spend some time with the business itself. And the big struggle, I think, has been making sure to carve out 4 and 5 hour blocks of time that are all about writing, are all about production, and being really jealous of that and not letting anything come in the way of it. Mm-hmm. Is so difficult and so important to making the show work.
Okay. Art, I imagine that as head of audio production for the digital media company Vox, you've been really in a period of having to move quickly as well. So can you tell us about what your typical day is like? If you even have a typical day, maybe you're more like Glynn and there is no such thing as a typical day.
Yeah, I would agree with Glynn. And first I want to thank you for inviting me, for giving me an opportunity to wear a button-down shirt for the first time in 3 months. I would say that, as things started ramping up in March, Vox Media has a lot of different shows, a lot of different podcasts on a whole range of,
Mm.
ranging from the Ezra Klein show and the Weeds, which, speak to this moment better, to, sports podcasts and tech podcasts. And so in my role, what I've had to do, I'm sort of helping all teams produce things, and for that, before COVID, was meant handling a lot of the studios, handling any technical issues, but also show running various short form narrative podcasts, which, like Glynn was saying, takes anywhere from like 3 to 6 months to put together. So I was a showrunner for a podcast about utopias called Nice Try with Avery Trufelman. A podcast called Land of the Giants, which was about Amazon and how Amazon got its power. And so I was working on a whole bunch of different other shows when COVID happened, and then it was just a scramble of like, oh, we can't do in-person interviews anymore. Can we find studios outside to do it? Or we can't do that. How do we get audio equipment to our 30 or 40 hosts? And how do we conduct interviews with celebrities who don't know how to use Zoom, things like that.
Are there celebrities that don't know how to use Zoom?
No, they probably use Zoom, but they don't know how to. It's not the audio quality even now. I'm sure it's
Right.
terrible, So it's more about what I've been saying is it's been like sort of re-level setting all the time. It's just sort of like, oh, what are we hoping to do, and what can we accomplish in these times? And it's been challenging. I think it's been challenging to produce at the same quality and at the same speed as we wanted to. People are some of my hosts have decided like, oh, we're moving upstate. We're not living in a city anymore. And so, trying to figure out how that recording is going to happen, and also from the business side, like, advertisers are skittish and, are changing they're like, we really need to drop this podcast in this month. Can we wait a few months, in a different quarter? And so, juggling that as well. So I would say my day is both producing specific podcasts that I'm working on, including another season of Land of the Giants, and handling all sorts of incoming issues of production and planning and for the next couple of quarters.
Okay. All right. So let's talk maybe a little bit about how you got to where you are. So we, of course, are the law affinity group for Hopkins, and you are both lawyers. So Art, sticking with you for a minute, like, why did you go to law school? You went to Yale and then went to NYU. So tell us a little bit about why you went to law school to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was a political science major in college, so I was always interested in the law and, government. But, I do think that at the time we were graduating college, I had a more creative interest of, I probably would have been an English major if it hadn't been for some of the requirements. But also I couldn't see myself graduating college and then becoming like an editorial assistant in New York City, living on, at that time, probably like $19,000 a year or something like that. And law school, it did not fit, but, and I think as maybe Glynn would say is like, once you get on the law school track and then the law firm and stuff, like you sort of make incremental decisions along the way, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, how did I get here? So, I mean, I greatly enjoyed law school, and some of my closest friends are from that time period. And I think it's certainly a hugely worthy intellectual exercise. It just, the practice of it was what, was less appealing to me in the long run.
Right, right. And Glynn, what about you? You went to University of Michigan, both for undergrad and for law school. Why did you go to law school?
I was actually in Japan for a while. I was working on a bunch of social development projects there, and someone basically said, "Oh, you need some letters or some gray hair after your name or something like that." And I was thinking, actually, my background was in nonprofit and international development, and so I went to law school really to kind of further that sort of thing. My other option might have been Georgetown. I'm kind of like Art. I like English. So it was one of those things I thought I'd take a break from and figure out some things. The pressure, and there are a lot of students on this line right now, the pressure that you feel that to get that firm job, I found myself, even though I knew full well that I would not be anybody's firm person, I found myself being swept into that vortex of, you know, oh, I better get a law firm job because that's what the man say do. And it was really, it took me a second to, you know, to shake my head and realize that was not my intention in the first place. So why would it be in my intention on the way out? At least at Michigan, I remember at the time, something like 2/3 of the people who entered said they wanted to go into some either public policy or nonprofit law. By the time of graduation had occurred, it was something less than 5% were actually doing that. And so, and a lot of that is, of course, the economics of paying for the law degree in the first place. But I know that for myself. This is a kind of a funny aside. I'm doing a story this week, and it was about one of my firm interviews, and the dude was asking me, he's like, you know, hey, you know, you sit down to the law firm interview with the firm, and the big firm in DC, and they pull up your transcript, and you see this guy kind of scratch his head a little bit, and he's like, what is this about modern Chinese calligraphy? And I'm like, well, I can explain. He's like, science fiction, fantasy, and sci-fi literature. What is this? I'm like, well, that was just and he's going through my transcript where I thought was a loophole, and it said that you could take a certain number of upper level classes, graduate classes, and still be within your law school career. I might have picked too many of them, and they called me out on it. But I think that was in the end, though not in the immediate time, in the end, it was probably for the best. It kind of helped. It made me know that because I'm just like Art. I actually really, really like law school. I like the intellectual aspect of it. I like some of the challenges of it. I have an advocacy background that was kind of ready-made for that. But I didn't. The law firm thing was just a type of it was a ninth circle of hell for me. And so, but I still like having a law degree, and I still like law school. So put that in the mix.
So tell us a little bit more, Glynn, about your law practice experience and your experience, you know, in the law firms. Because well, I guess just tell us about that first. And I also want to just mention, as an aside, before I forget, I wanted to remind our participants that they can ask questions. There's a Q&A button, so feel free to put in your questions and we'll incorporate them as we go along, or we'll ask them at the end. So, okay, so back to you, Glynn, about talking about your law practice experience.
Well, you know, I was in a big firm for a quick minute, and before they fired me, which was the best decision they ever made and the best decision for me. I remember everyone being sad and, you know, had to go to HR and all that kind of stuff, but I couldn't get the grin off my face because now I tried it. I did it that way. I did it, you know, I took the various steps, and I think that there is this sort of momentum, this tide that takes over. And I thought I tried, but that didn't work out so well. So now I felt the freedom to try something else. And that freedom it was everything. It gave me the confidence, and the need, as far as feeding myself, to figure out what do I really want to do? What am I good at? And it turns out that the law degree itself is this magic wand that lets you have access to all sorts of things that you wouldn't otherwise be qualified for, that you are not in fact qualified for. In San Francisco, I came out here, I stayed on my buddy's couch, who you know my buddy very, very well,
I do.
Shauna.
I do.
And I stayed on his couch when I was applying for.
I met you, Glynn. No, I met you before then, but that's.
Right.
I think I met you the year before then.
That buddy is your brother, but
Yes.
when I was sitting on his couch and interviewing for jobs, I'd go to a place and they'd say, and I said, I thought maybe I would do something back to nonprofits, and I went and I applied, and they said, well, you don't have any background in managing homeless issues, but you do have this law degree. We'll give you a shot, which in fact makes zero sense. It makes the opposite of sense. If anyone wants to construct a world, they would not necessarily give that power to the lawyers in the room. But again, it's not. you play the game. You don't have to make the rules. So from that, I was running a UN organization. We don't have any background in that. Well, he does have a law degree. Let's give him a shot. It was a real type of magic and a real alchemy. And I was very, it made me, I just can't say enough about the power of the legal degree to allow me to try some things that I might not otherwise have been given the opportunity to do.
Right. Art, can you talk a little bit about your law practice experience? Because I think you didn't spend much more time in a law firm than Glynn did, right? You did 1 year and you were one and done.
Is that a thing? Yeah, no, I was right. I think I've said this in other places, but I think it was like a former Wachtell partner who became a Harvard law professor who said like becoming a partner at a law firm is like winning a pie eating contest where the prize is more pie, and so yeah, I was pretty unhappy. Again, the people were great. The work was not what I was interested in. And I think also at the time I was the first year, it was sort of like, if I was probably playing it a little smarter, might have, because I don't think everybody, obviously the numbers don't work out. People, the number of people who these big firms are starting their first year class, look to your left, look to your right, maybe 1 in 10 of them will become a partner, right? 9, 10 have to go somewhere,
Right.
So, I think most people expect it to be there, 3 or 4 years, become a mid-level associate and then leave or whatever, or see what happens, But I think when we were going to when we had graduated, like the ratio of like first year salaries to student debt was like the worst, it was like, there wasn't those giant bump ups in big firm salaries. So like, I was like, well, I'm never going to pay this off anyway. My student loans, I'm still paying off my student loans theoretically, so it's like, well, I'm not going to, pay them off anyway, so I might as well leave. But were you asking like what was I doing specifically? Like, did you want me to talk about that or?
Well, you could talk about that, but I'm also curious about some of the things that you were saying about, even like, when did you realize that this wasn't for you? Like, did you realize that already in law school and then you needed to confirm it out in a law firm? Or, was it the minute you walked into the door and you said, oh, this is not going to be a good fit? Was it, when did it sort of dawn on you, and how did it dawn on you really that you not only that you didn't want to be in a law firm, but maybe you didn't want to practice law in any traditional sense?
Yeah, I think most people have that. It's not like everybody who goes to law school, not that, many people love being lawyers and being lawyers at big firms as well. I think though that like nobody is walking in with their eyes completely closed. They just hear it, but it's like, it's something that you have to experience. You have to like, oh, this is what they meant, in terms of both the hours and the clients and the nature of the work. I think that, I try to, in some ways, try to get the best experience possible. I went to one of the quote nice big firms as opposed to the mean big firms. I tried to pick something, I was interested in city planning issues. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll do real estate and property stuff. I wound up doing some of that, but also wound up just doing a lot more commercial lending. So, it wasn't like, so I think after about a year of that, I was like, right, this isn't going to get any better. And it just wasn't something I was interested in. So I felt like if I didn't cut bait sooner than later, I would be tied by either the financial, just like getting paid too much money to leave, or feeling pressure to just stay on and see it through. So that's why I left earlier than later. Yeah.
So you were very concerned about the golden handcuffs idea.
Absolutely, for sure.
So how did you get started down the road of media? Was that a conscious decision, like that you knew that you wanted to be in media, or did you just sort of fall into it because, like Glynn was saying, the law degree was very versatile for him and it opened up a lot of doors into doing non-legal work?
Yeah, I think it was, no, I had always done, writing and journalism. As you know, I was on one of the school newspapers. I was editor of one of the school papers. Even in law school, I was lucky enough, I had friends in New York City who they had just started Time Out New York. And so I was freelancing for them, even as a third year associate. I was like writing restaurant reviews and video game reviews. So I did have clips that I could use. And so when I was looking, when I realized, yes, I want to leave the firm, I was like, well, it makes sense that I would try to do something in journalism. And so I was able to get a journalism job. And like Glynn was saying, like, yeah, I wasn't, well, I think I was like, it was a Smart Money magazine. It was a financial services magazine, well, like a consumer finance magazine. So it's like, here are the 10 stocks you need to pick now. And so I was able to say like, well, I worked in, commercial lending. I know something about companies more than the, recent college graduate. And so like, okay, so they made me a reporter. And right. So I don't think I had any particular extra knowledge, but was able to, I think, you just have a little bit more life experience and like was able to figure that out. So I would say I did have a leg up because I had always been writing and I always had something to show people that I was doing, and so that really helped me find, it wasn't like completely out of nowhere, what I was doing.
But then you did end up down the game show path.
Yeah, that was more of a random
So
thing.
talk a little bit about how you ended up working on game shows. And
yeah, I mean, right, this was 1999. I had left the firm for about 8 months or a year. I was at Smart Money magazine, and a friend of mine who was working in entertainment said, oh, they're making this game show called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And I think it had come out in the summer for 2 weeks with Regis Philbin, and then they were interested in bringing it back in New York City. And so, because Regis lived in New York City, and there hadn't been a primetime game show in production in like 40 years. So it was a bit of an open casting call. And so I was just asked to apply. They were just taking all applications, and it was like an anonymous, like write a writing sample of questions. And so I was fortunate enough to have one that was picked. And so, I said goodbye to the second career, journalism, and went to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where I stayed for both the primetime series and then the syndicated series. And it's funny because, when I left Smart Money, I mean, this is, the ability of youth and having, no responsibilities or children, but the contract was for, I think, 5 weeks. It's like, here's a 5-week contract. And then, of course, they extended it, for like years. But like, I was like, yeah, what's the worst that could happen at that point? Like, it was a great 5-week experience. But I was very fortunate that, the show was a huge hit when it came out again. And then it just kept going. And so that started my career.
So Glynn, you've embraced that kind of risk-taking strategy too, of right, what's the worst that could happen? And in all of the different sorts of things that you've done, can you talk a little bit about your path to Snap Judgment?
Well, I have it's a very, very strange path, but I kind of want to generalize it a little bit. So what happened, I used to run a center out of the UC School of Business, the UC Berkeley School of Business. And I was an early podcast aficionado. And I heard about a opportunity to be on a brand new potential, they didn't tell you what it was actually. It was said, are you hosty? And Ira Glass, Terry Gross, a few other big prominent NPR people said, enter this contest and send us a clip. And I did. I found out about the contest through a podcast I was listening to. This was early podcasting, and it turned out that the deadline was the next day. So I made a little clip and I sent it in.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt. So if I remember correctly, this is like 2009, right?
Yes.
2009?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Maybe 2008. But, and then I sent it in and I forgot about it. I forgot all about it. And about 3 months later, I was eating at a Chinese restaurant in Berkeley, and I got a call saying I was one of 10 finalists nationwide. Of course, I knew better. I thought it was my buddy Mark playing a joke on me, so I hung up the phone on him. And they called back and said, we know who Mark is, but do you want to do this? And it was a contest, and every week they would kick somebody off the island, so to speak. And eventually, to make a very, very long story shorter, I won, but again, there was nothing to win. And it took a while to be able to get some resources before they did, in fact, go ahead and help and put the money in to launch the first year of Snap Judgment. But what I really want to tell people about that is this. That was all well and good. And that, it took about a 2-year process to go from, winning the contest to starting the show. That was all well and good. But what the real deal is, at the time, I had probably applied just on whims to maybe 15 different types of things, from script writing shows to I was composing music. There was a comic book writer's room. All these various things. My goal at the time was, I want to find a way to be an artist some kind of way. And even when we started Snap Judgment, the goal was, can we pay the rent telling stories? That was basically it. And it was like, and all these there was literally 15 different darts at the board, and this was the one that hit. And I think it seems a little bit like random, and it is. It's definitely saying, I'm gonna make an educated leap here, an educated guess as to what my next thing is gonna be. But it was, the goal was, can I actually find a way to feed myself and my family through a different aspect of my being? I don't fit in the traditional box. I have talents, I have skills that don't seem to be well compensated for in a law firm. So let me find a different spot. And it took a while. And I remember when I was first leaving the university, and my father was helping me carry my stuff out in cardboard boxes. And he was not pleased at all. He's like, you got yourself this office, boy. What are you doing? What is this podcasting thing anyway? What is this thing? And it was hard for me to give him an answer. Truly, it was. And it was, I'm not going to lie, sit here and tell you that I had a big master plan and I knew exactly what I was going to do, all that kind of stuff, because I didn't. But I felt like I had to do something then, or I had already been swept into a vortex once. I wanted to be sure that I was the one leading the charge for the next round. And I appreciated that experience before, of feeling like the pressure of law school to do that thing. There is definitely a ladder that you're on in a law school context that you just, even if you don't think you're on it on first year, by the time you're getting to the second semester of third year, you're definitely on it. And being able to walk away from that was just, or I not even walk away, to be able to say, like, I can still direct my own future to some extent. I don't necessarily have to be on this path that is laid out. So many people in law school are these high achievers. If you give us a task, we'll do it. If you give us a test, we're gonna pass it. If you give us these things, we're gonna do that stuff because that's the way our brains work. Oh, give me a standardized test and let me fill in some blanks. I'm gonna fill the hell out of it. But take it, and we have succeeded in life from that aptitude. And I think it's really important to take a step back at the end of this whole, the law school is a culmination of years and years of academic study and rigor and everything like that, and to put you into what exactly? And you think you have to do this one thing, and it's not necessarily so. And I just want to put that out there. It is just not necessarily so.
Right. Art, I wonder, when you were walking away from the law firm and traditional practice of law and moving off this track, like Glynn was talking about, that law school students, junior lawyers, we tend to get funneled down a path. Did you meet with resistance to that? Like, did people tell you don't do it? Lawyers aren't generally known for wanting to embrace risk.
I was
Very
literally
often telling people, don't do it, but did you run into that? And if so, how did you handle that?
Yeah, no, I was actually literally, that was my note, was like, the problem is that most lawyers, I mean, you spend 3 years hearing about all the terrible things that can happen in like random situations, and you are become very risk averse. And actually, no, it was quite the opposite, where, for many years, I mean, I still get these calls maybe once a year or something like that. It'd be like, oh, my friend is a lawyer and they want to know how you did it. How do you get out of being a lawyer? And I would always be confused. I'd be like, I mean, I just did it. Like, I mean, there's no like lock, like there's no like, you just do it, but I think it's just that fear of taking that first step and just being like, okay, admitting like, yeah, this is, not, like, the fallacy of sunk costs, like you being able to walk away from that cost. And, I mean, and it is, I say this a lot. It's like, it wasn't costless to me. I didn't have, my parents weren't like supporting me. I didn't, I took like a 70% pay cut, to like become a journalist. And I moved in with some, some friends, and, I ate ramen for a year, like it wasn't easy. It was just sort of like, it was either that or stay the path that I was doing, And so my parents were sort of confused, I think, but like also like, they were like, well, you're an adult and like, you can make that decision, So, but I think people get caught in either how people would perceive that decision, for sure, like how can you do that, especially walking away from, a very well-respected law school and a respected law job, and also just feeling right. And so like you do have your doubts, and I don't know, you just try to, I think it was just more like, for me, it was never a question of whether to make that switch, because the pressure of the alternative was just not, not tenable for me. It was just like, no, I wasn't going to be doing this for 10 years. Like, so why not switch now?
So how has your law degree and your legal background or your legal training, how has that helped you in your career in media, whether it's, working on NPR programs or moving it to Vox, or, starting with Smart Money? Like, how has your law degree and your legal skills, your legal training, how have they helped you? And I suppose the flip side of that would be, have there been any things that you almost had to train yourself out of? Right.
Right. Yeah.
Like maybe the risk aversion part that you were mentioning. I find that's one area that lawyers, particularly as they move from law firms into other settings, almost have to teach themselves to be less risk sensitive.
Yeah. I mean, overall, I'm extremely happy to have a law degree, especially when I've segued into more management and production roles. That's not just purely creative, but because at any large company, you have to deal with the legal team, whether it's contracts or, partnerships, or even in, particularly for broadcast, for radio, fair use issues and rights issues and things like that. So often I would find myself having to defer or wait for the legal department to like sign off on the document. I'm like, can I just sign this document, or can I just like draft this document myself, and, and sort of shortcut, waiting. But I also appreciate very much like the ability to be able to read a contract, say what I want from a business standpoint, and just send it off and be like, okay, but I'll let the lawyers like, make it pretty. I will say though, like, like to raise a fair use issue, like podcasting is, endemic with like, oh, how did they pay for that, 30-second clip of Kanye West? You're like, no, they didn't pay for that. But like, and so your lawyer brain is like, we should really button up and like know like what we're able to use and stuff like that, versus if you didn't have that sort of legal knowledge, you can just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna like rip a movie, like or whatever, or just use a popular song as scoring, and so there is that balance of like knowing what the quote rules are versus especially in a medium like podcasting, which is a little, still trying to figure things out. And some people are doing it for profit. Some people are doing it, as a hobby, and so I think overall though, it's very helpful to have a legal background, just to be able to like, make those sort of decisions, and even just to hand off that decision to the real lawyers on your company, just to be like, okay, but I know when you're when you're BSing me or not, you know?
So Glenn, same question for you. You know, can you talk a little bit about how your law degree, or, you know, that minute you spent in law practice, has that impacted how you know, how your career has gone at Snap Judgment? Do you find it that you use any of that training or skills?
I am extremely fortunate. I was working for a business law firm in a business group, and the stuff I learned there. Now, again, I was the worst employee they've hired in their storied history, but the combination of getting some business background and with the legal background, you know, when I was eventually wanting to be an artist is all well and good. That's all great. The initial grant that I got to start Step Judgment, several people got that grant, and several of them were extremely talented. And it turns out, a matter of talent that ensured the longevity of these programs. All those various programs they started, they're all gone now, except for Snap. I mean, I like to think that Snap is brilliant and great, and amazing storytelling, and it's all of those things. Don't get me wrong. But the real deal is that we made some business decisions early on that because of we had enough of a business background to see this isn't really about the content. We have to make this content. We have to be able to read a spreadsheet. We have to be able to pay people. It turns out they want their paychecks on time. They all of that things that go into a business, even now. You know, the big goal has been like my time has been spent out. What I wanted to do was tell stories. That's all I wanted to do, and it got to the point where more than 70% of my time was spent running an actual organization. My big goal has been to try and invert that, so that 30% of my time is spent running the organization. The rest of the time I can spend actually working on the stuff that I love, which is the writing and the story production and all that kind of thing. But you can't forget that 30%. That 30% makes everything happen. And that 30% is, in fact, the legal, like Art was talking about. Some of the problems that people were making when they tried to expand their podcast, it's all well and good to use that Kanye West clip when you have 50 followers. You can't use that Kanye West clip when you have the types of followers that we were aiming for. And knowing that early on and switching our production to accommodate for like the huge expense of saying we're going to score every single story ourselves in-house with musicians that we hire so that we control the whole thing from start to finish was a huge financial burden and risk. But it's something that we knew we needed to do from a legal perspective. They weren't coming after us yet, but they were gonna come. And I knew that as a lawyer, they're coming, they're waiting. And it's happened. It's destroyed some organizations because they weren't careful about rights issues early on, and they weren't watching their income statements, and all of that stuff. There's always everyone wants to be the artist running around the field with the streams and the birds and all that kind of stuff, but knowing how things work and how from the legal and numerical analysis, being able to do that, being able to look at a spreadsheet, being able to look at don't have someone interpret an Excel spreadsheet for you, but to know what it looks like yourself, to be able to talk to your tax man intelligently. That's why we can do this. It's not something on the peripheral, it's central. And I think it's literally what's kept us afloat.
So can we stick with that for a minute and talk a little bit about the business model of podcasting and the business model of NPR radio? Like, how does that all work?
Let me just kind of define terms a little bit. I don't work for NPR. And in fact, I was actually fired from NPR. I'm fired a lot, as it turns out. Art doesn't either. And if you want to talk about, how to run a big, actual successfully, financially successful organization, you want to turn more to art than to me. But as I will say that the world of podcasting is in a lot of ways still the Wild West, and the models are changing on a really, really rapid basis. And when we started, I thought that podcasting would be bigger more quickly than it actually has been. But now that the big players are coming into this space, it's a whole new game, and people are really very, very much still figuring it out. And I say that all that to say that I don't want to be necessarily a part of all respect to NPR. NPR we were there for 5 years, and we've been with another big public radio station, WNYC, for a long time. But we've always been a separate company. I'll say this. This goes back to the point about the whole law thing. 5 years ago, Stamp Judgment was an NPR was distributed by NPR, and I got a call one day from NPR saying that the show was canceled. And gave me a schedule for winding down our production. And I got the phone call, I hung it up, and I thought, how are they going to cancel something they don't own? They don't own this show. We do. So I called up some other people and said, what about you guys distributing this show? How would that work? And before, the week was out, we had another plan. And that was all about knowing who owned what, where the rights were, how I could transfer them over. That was all law and business. It had nothing to do with art. But that switch saying, you don't get to cancel this show, that's power. And that's what the law background really is in a lot of these things. It's power. It's let so many artists get their life work stolen from them in so many different ways. And the legal background that you're getting right now lets you say, no. I know who owns what here. I might not, like Art said, I might have somebody prettify this stuff up a little bit, but I know the basic legal concepts of the world I'm in. And I know what goes where and who owns what. And people will tell you different, and they will trick you. So this happens so much in art, right? I'm seeing this, people being robbed blind all the time for their music rights, for their story rights, for their stories, for the things that they invested their entire heart and soul into. And it makes me weep sometimes. I feel fortunate to be in a position where I can honestly tell people, you are being robbed right now. And it's not going to be me. We try to be very ethical. I remember as an artist, I feel like we have a responsibility to this world to treat artists in an ethical way. And even I've put this out on Twitter, I've put this out on other places before. If you just need an eyeball to say, am I being robbed or not? Is somebody taking advantage of me? Just, I'll give it a few seconds and look at other podcasters. Aaron Mahnke from Lore, he says the same thing. He's like, look, find a way to not get screwed, because the good thing about podcasting has been this: it's still a small enough world where you can basically still talk to everybody. You're not going to get a hold of Ira on the first call, Ira Glass or anything like that. And Terry Gross isn't picking up her cell phone, but basically everybody you can still talk to them.
Right.
And they will, and they will actually try to help you to the best that their time and abilities will allow. And that esprit de corps, I mean, it's the bigger it gets, the more we lose it, but it's still very much there. And I love that aspect of our field.
Right. And Art, you've also been on both sides, right? Of being on the creative side and on the business side. So can you talk a little bit about the differences that you see there between the, being a former lawyer on the creative side, being a former lawyer on the business side, and also can you talk a little bit about a digital media company's business model and the drivers there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, like Glynn was saying, I mean, podcasting, the DNA of podcasting is public radio, right? Because it's all of a sudden, all these people who, for better or worse, I mean, Gimlet guys where it came from, NPR, what I would say, I'm sure Glynn would probably agree, was that, NPR is great about the content, but, they're a nonprofit. And so they don't, one of the issues I had with NPR was not knowing, like, well, how are we judging the success of this show if we don't know if, and it's okay to not make money. It's just to be like, okay, but then we're not looking at things editorially. How are we judging things? I think, and, the podcast business is still growing, and it's not there yet, compared to broadcast, what do we call it, broadcast television or cable or movies, the industry. I mean, I think they claim it's going to be $1 billion industry, but it's going to be spread out over, there's going to be some very big podcasts and a lot of very small podcasts. And so I think the challenge that we're all figuring out is like how to sustain it on different levels, and also because podcasts range from, two guys in a basement with a microphone to highly produced, shows like Snap, which take months and months and a lot of very talented people to put together, At Vox, we're trying to do all of those different levels, what we call always on shows, weekly shows that, just like at NPR, where it's like every week we put out something and that builds an audience, and that also has a lot of, individual impressions, versus, sort of bespoke episodes or series, like we did, Ezra Klein did a series about impeachment, which was just, he wanted to do it. It was the moment, and, can you remember impeachment? Everybody remember impeachment back in, but, and that was, I think, 6 to 8 episodes, and that was it, I think that, but yes, but to Glenn's point, like, it's having a law degree and understanding the business issues and who owns what is incredibly important, because the field is changing, and also the expectations are very different at different levels, so, like I was saying, if you just want to make a small podcast that has like a couple thousand listeners, like, a lot of issues don't matter. But once you really, as in every part of business, once the money comes in, the people, people want to get paid, and people, get very possessive about their rights. So it's good to know that.
So Art, you've mentioned a couple times about how the industry has been changing. So can you talk a little bit about some of the drivers of change? Like, is it mostly technology? Are you seeing changes in modeling and drivers that are coming from COVID in terms of the way things are created or consumed or distributed? What are some of the change drivers that you're seeing?
Right. I mean, I think we would say that the most recent boom, and it's funny because, right, people are like, oh, podcast began when, podcast has had many, first days, like people are like, oh, Serial was the first time. But then if you're old enough, you remember, I mean, there have been podcasts for over 20 years, it's just who was listening and the technology. And I would say that, I think the iPhone and the other technology of being able to listen to it and also being able to download things to your phones or stream them, really, that was this age of podcasting, this quote golden age of podcasting. And so as that happened, and as the numbers, as you have podcast native shows like the Joe Rogan Show or, The Ringer, get audiences that rival that of television. And that also as television has gone down, right? Like, so when I was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, we had 30 million viewers a week at the top, which is an insane amount of viewers. When it was canceled, it had 11 million viewers, which would be more than the #1 show on television now, right? So this sort of fracturing of the media consumption landscape has led some podcasts to rival that. So it's like, that's when the advertising dollars come in, and that's when all these big players like Spotify, Apple, iHeartMedia, which is, a terrestrial radio company, that's where they're seeing people's consumption move, in terms of COVID, initially there was a big there was a lot of hand wringing, especially in the internal media of like, oh, are people going to stop because they're stopped commuting, and our numbers showed that like, yes, there was a definite drop, but it wasn't that big. It wasn't as big as compared to the drop in other forms of digital media consumption. And there was a bump up certainly in like the news shows and the commentary shows that were focused on COVID. That I think in the last 4 weeks, as everybody else's fatigue of COVID has increased, like, and I think you can just think about your own personal consumption of like whether you were whether you were like updating data every websites daily to like now you're like, okay, I know it's there. That consumption has gone down and other forms of consumption have gone up, like more what I would call distraction, like entertainment type podcasts. So like, I mean, but like there's no one podcast. So it's like there's a whole universe of different shows that some of them do compete with each other and some of them don't, but overall there's still growth in podcasting. I think people are saying that the people are not commuting, but people are listening for lunch, or they're listening as they're walking the dog or doing the dishes, which they're doing more of. So I think the industry itself has held up pretty well in these times, and I think it's just going to keep growing.
So I'm going to ask Glynn this question. So how do people go? We were talking about the different scales of some podcasts in particular. So how do people go from being, Wayne and Garth in their basement to Snap Judgment or Serial? Like, how does that happen? I mean, I realize that your individual case is a little bit different because you won the contest, and that changed things, that changed your trajectory. So I realize that you may have a little bit different perspective personally, but can you talk a little bit about like, how do people do that? If a lawyer wants to do that, leave law and become a podcaster, or you do podcasting as a supplement to what they do, how do they make that change? How do they make a leap?
They work their ass off, and they work their ass off in a few different ways. The best way, one of my favorite stories is when I first started, as you know, I'm a science fiction head from back in the day. And one of the early podcasts that I listened to was this guy, Scott Sigler. And he was working, and he made a story every single week. And he would give stories to other podcasts that were science fiction. This was early on. This is like 10 years ago. And he was doing his thing, and he was like an unpublished, unsigned science fiction author. But if anyone within this community needed anything, he would give them a show. He'd give them a story. He'd do an interview for them. He'd do whatever he could, not just his show, but for theirs. Mm-hmm. And I'll just say as an aside, if you want the best thing in the world, I'll tell you another two stories. I'll tell you two stories. So this is what Scott would do. And then Scott was going to come out with his new book. Again, this is an unsigned a self-published book that he was going to have. And he asked people to listening to his podcast to please buy it on a certain date. It was a Sunday. And he called it Sunday Bloody Sunday. And he went on all the rest of the podcast and said, I've helped you in the past. Could you just promote this thing that I've got here? And they all did. And all of a sudden, this unsigned author that no one ever heard of, at the time no one ever really heard of podcasting, became the #1 science fiction author in the country on a certain date. And all of a sudden, everyone had to pay attention to it. It was incredible. It was incredible. And it was like the first flex that I saw in the public, in the podcasting system that had ripples outside of it. And I'll say this too. Our first hire here was a guy at Snap Judgment, was a guy by the name of Roman Mars, who went on to found the 99% Invisible podcast and subsequently the Radiotopia Network. Well, that show was doing well. Roman launched it. The show was doing great, but then I got to introduce him to Jad Abumrad from Radiolab. And Roman has been working on this show, and Jad, like everybody else in the creative community, around Christmas time is exhausted. Now, he can either make another brand new, incredibly elaborate radio show, or guess what? Roman has made an episode that would actually 3 different stories that were produced on an extremely high production level, extremely high quality stuff. And when Jad said, look, I'll just put this here on my own Christmas feed and I'll go and play with my kids under the tree. He put that on the Radiolab feed and all of a sudden 99% Invisible blew up. The best thing that someone can do for me, I know, like, is give me something that I don't have to fuss with. It is so hard, like that whole that 4 to 6 month thing making a story. If you give me something that is on a level that I can use and put it on the thing, it's like a gift from heaven. We've done this repeatedly now with the different podcasts, including Ear Hustle and The Truth. And they see bumps because we just expose them to our audience. Can't wait to expose them to our audience. And that's what you have to do, is find a way to get into a situation where you can share what you're doing with the community of podcasters and other people can share your stuff.
Okay. So is that, do you take pitches then from people? Like how would somebody get their pitch to you, whether that pitch is a rough pitch or whether it's, a highly produced, almost plug and play story or piece?
All the same way, yeah. Pitches at snapjudgment.org. And pitches at snapjudgment.org. And what happened, we don't get enough of them. We don't get anywhere near enough. And when we do, oftentimes it's something that Ira Glass has already rejected for This American Life. And those shows are different. People don't understand, and it doesn't necessarily work. If it doesn't work for him, it might not work for us either. But we're if at first you don't succeed, try again. Most of my own stories don't make it on my own damn show, and people. But we're always looking for pitches, and we can't wait to. Literally, it's if you can make something though that you think would work on Snap or any other show, if you just make that thing, if the show uses it, then you get the publicity of the show. If they don't, you still have the piece. And that's where you're trying to, when you're trying to build your show, you're trying to get placed on other programs in your whatever your area of the world is.
So, and Art, how about you with Vox? Does Vox Media accept pitches? And if so, like what form do you want to see them in? How would somebody get a pitch in front of Vox Media?
Yeah, I mean, I do take pitches. I don't, we don't have, Glynn has a show that, it has a regular drop of feed. We don't do that as much, but we do take pitches from producers. We are looking at it from a development standpoint of, is this a show that, is a certain number of episodes, or could it be a long form thing? So, but I can leave my email in the Slack, and if people are in the chat and people want to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk to them about it. I will say though, that like the field is very competitive and getting more competitive all the time. I mean, I think, the number is something between 700,000 to 800,000 podcasts. Of course, many of them are not ongoing or are very basic quality, but I think that if you have you need to have an idea, and you need to be able to execute it at a high level, and to like really pick out what makes you different from everybody else who's doing it. A long time ago, when I think Radiohead, the band, came out with they were one of the first to sell digitally, if you remember. Like before that, everyone was like going crazy, and they're like, how did Radiohead sell all those, get people to buy their albums online? And they're like, well, first you have to be Radiohead. Like it helps to be Radiohead. It never doesn't help to be Radiohead.
Right. So what, as we wrap up here, what recommendations do you have for lawyers or law students who want to make the leap into media or podcasting specifically, or alternatively who are just thinking about leaving traditional law practice and exploring something different, whether it's the creative side or whether it's the business side of just something different? Or do you have any kind of bits of advice for those people?
Yeah, and I mean, I see some of the questions in about how do you tell your parents that too. I mean, I think, you're only going to regret the choices you don't make. And like, and also like, it's not like, I mean, Glenn and I have a bit of a survivor bias, right? So because we definitely succeeded, and there are people who don't. But if you don't, you still have the law degree. You can still go back to practicing or trying something. But like, there's no, you should just figure out, take a stab. And I think also for lawyers it helps, like, give yourself a time frame. Like, okay, I'm going to try this for a year or 2 years. Do anything, take anything. Like, Glynn pitched 13 things. I was doing, everybody has a side hustle, and make that your main hustle, and give it a shot. And the worst thing that can happen is that you learn some things, and it's too hard to make that into a career, and then you still have something to fall back on. So you should see yourself as having less risk, or it being a less risky adventure than you think it is.
Glynn, what about you? Do you have some words of advice for people who are contemplating either going into media or podcasting, or just going into leaving the traditional practice of law?
Yeah, I would piggyback on a lot of what Art said. I would add, when you start a podcast, or you start any kind of thing, you're making a commitment to both yourself and to your audience, and make sure that you stick to that. Like, if you're going to put out a podcast, put it out when you pick a schedule. Come hell or high water, hit that schedule, make that thing work, and it gives you a discipline. We're very, very good. Again, people in the legal background, we love to check boxes. We love to say we've done this thing, we've accomplished certain thing. This field means that we have to we don't get to check someone else's boxes. We have to make our own. And that switch is a mental switch. It's like, I'm not just going to, my goal isn't to fit necessarily in someone else's box. It's to build a box. And that's a very, very difficult thing for someone who's been these academic thoroughbreds, is which we've been bred to be, to make that mental switch and say, I'm going to try and construct a different world. Podcasting, whatever it is you're doing, whatever leap you make off this diving board, I mean, podcasting is a good one because it's still being built. We're building the bridge as we're running across it. But anything outside of this stuff, there's so many new media opportunities right now. All the kids these days are talking about, they want to be the next TikToker. YouTube right now, a lot of reason behind Joe Rogan's success in podcasting is because it was backed up by this YouTube audience that he's cultivated at the same time. What's going to be the next synergy that makes one thing or another take off? I don't think anyone has any idea. But what I do know this is that the power is slipping fast away from the traditional media organizations and going into something else entirely. When you have something like a YouTuber named PewDiePie having 5 times more subscribers than the New York Times, something is happening. Something very, very powerful is happening. And it makes sense that we would want to get. No one is more analytically equipped to take advantage of this seismic shift than people with the background that we have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I guess my last question, because we're at the hour, and I definitely want to thank you both again for spending time with us. But so as we're wrapping up here, I will ask you, one of the questions, Glynn, is about one of your favorite episodes of Snap Judgment. So that's probably a difficult question, but I will ask, do you have a favorite episode or something that really stuck with you? Or maybe just asking the question a little bit differently, do you have a favorite highlight in your career in podcasting? Like, I keep thinking, for example, I know you do live shows that you all have gone on tour, and there are moments, I think that must have been just a wonderful high to like have that first live show, and to see your podcast audience in person. But I'm not going to put words in your mouth. So you tell me your highlights.
it's just, I've got more than I can even begin to know. I will say that, like you said, I've loved being on stage. It's been terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. One of the things that happened, you know, because we're putting out like 35 shows a year, oftentimes, I remember once writing on stage my opening story and having the musicians look over me and say, I don't know what you're gonna say. Mouth this to me, and then the music starts and walking on stage, having maybe finished something 30 seconds beforehand, and with to 1,800 people, it's terrifying, but again, exhilarating at the same time. If people want to listen to something that I think is good, my favorite Snap Judgment show is always the one we just finished. So something that's special to me is, and this is kind of a compilation show, but we respond, the show we just did called Thick Blue Line, and it's about people's response to the stories from Black males about their experiences with the law enforcement system. And the feedback from it has been really incredible. And I think it's something that really speaks to this moment in the country. And so I'm really proud of it.
Excellent. And then Art, do you have a favorite show or episode that you worked on, or career highlight you want to share?
Well, yeah, I feel I should put something current where, Land of the Giants, we're having a new season about Netflix and about how we all in this time, are binging, watching, and at home, and how Netflix is really, they're actually a very interesting corporate culture of how they are really aggressive in terms of like weeding out people and stuff like that. I mean, that's not something I did. I would recommend Nice Try, which is a great series, just about it's just historical stories about, and also, it does examine things like, institutional racism in the suburbia and Jamestown. So it was a really fun and yet meaningful podcast to do.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the recommendations. Thank you for the recommendations. And again, I appreciate both Art Chung and Glynn Washington for being with us today and staying a little bit over time. As I said at the beginning, I know it's it's a very trying time for many people. So thank you for joining us and talking through what you're doing and how you got there and all the ways that you found law school to be helpful and your law degree to be helpful in your careers. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jamie Seward, who is our liaison with the Johns Hopkins Alumni Association, and she'll talk a little bit about how we're going to get the video link out to folks, and also about our LinkedIn group.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Art, Glynn, and Shauna. This was amazing. I've gotten nothing but positive feedback from everyone. So thanks so much for being a part of it. I will send a follow-up email to everyone with a link to the recording. And then the recording will live on the Alumni Learning Consortium website, which is in the chat. And I will send it in the email follow-up. Also, I will also send you a link to where you can join our Hopkins Alumni in Law, HAIL LinkedIn group. That's a great place to go to get all sorts of information and connect with other Hopkins alumni in law. So thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay awesome. You guys are amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Christine, Glenn. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.